All right, you guys. So welcome back to the show. I have another great friend of mine. Honestly, it seems like a lot of my guests that I invite, I always start off with, man, I haven't seen you for so many years.
Mhm.
And I've had a lot of, a few, not a lot, but a few people from the Czech Institute. And my guest today, Greg, I haven't seen him since I think like 2018 or so. And we took the same HLC3 class like a long while back. We definitely didn't sit next to each other in class. You're like way in front, if I remember correctly. And I was like,
I think we were completely opposite sides of the room.
yeah, in lectures, I always try to like disappear in the back
Yeah.
somewhere. So I remember you're like way in front. That was probably like that and HLC1 were probably like my favorite classes at the Czech Institute thus far. And I'm just happy to kind of see him here and catch up with him. And it's actually good timing that you reached out because for this year, my focus was on the topic why, especially like in America, and I feel it's the case in like Western worlds, why you really rarely see anyone create lasting change in their health, like fitness, mental
Mhm.
challenges. I mean, it
Mhm.
happens for sure, but it's fairly rare. Most of the time, what you see is people do get better short term, but then you see them many years later, or even just a few years later, and they kind of revert back to their old ways,
Mhm.
especially with like fat loss clients. That one's an easy topic for a lot of people to understand. And 80 to 90% of people that lose any amount of weight just end up regaining it 3 or 4 years later, plus an extra bonus 5 pounds just for the heck of it.
Mhm.
And I mean, just some startling numbers. I didn't bring all of them here today for the chat, but I did cover them a lot in other episodes. I mean, close to like 800,000 Americans die from heart attacks every year. 50% of Americans develop cancer within their lifetime, around 50%, and half of them die from it. Around 100,000 people now a year are dying just in America alone from like type 2 diabetes. Then
Mhm.
there's around like 130,000 people that die every year from properly prescribed medical drugs. So
Mhm.
no, you rarely hear that in the news. And I just feel it's kind of like, especially if you take this whole COVID episode into consideration, it's like, look at, the general population that needed hospitalization due to complications from getting COVID. It's
Mhm.
also just that same population. They have like many health problems already. They're extremely detached and very lacking health consciousness. And they're already like very, very sick to begin with. And
Mhm.
I just feel like, and also like another stat is, I forgot the number of the study, but like 9 out of 10 American adults now are metabolically unhealthy. And the study I'm referencing was just referencing very easy like to acquire stats. It's like basically is your heartbeat beating? Okay, it is. Okay, you're metabolically. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I'm joking here, of course.
Mhm.
But even 9 out of 10 Americans couldn't meet those very, very basic standards of like metabolic health. And I mean, I can keep going on and on. But I was just wondering what your take is on the situation, because it for sure doesn't seem to be getting better. And the healthcare system, if anything, is trying to just keep promoting these like endless symptom management strategies that are for sure profitable and keep patients in the revolving door of coming back to the practitioner, et cetera, but aren't really providing lasting change or any resolution um, to the person's health, which is kind of sad to see because oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes people are looking for real answers. And I just feel a lot of the healthcare these days in the fitness
Mhm.
community, in the holistic community for a small part, and especially in like the medical community, is providing them false hope through a lot of these symptom management techniques. I'm
Yeah.
just wondering what your take is on the situation.
Well, first off, thank you for having me. I appreciate you creating this sacred space for us to share and connect and reconnect after many years. And, you know, I always like to look at things from different vantage points. And one of the vantage points that I've been looking into a lot recently is the archetypal vantage point, right? And the truth is that all of our behaviors that you're talking about are rooted in choices that we make. And all choices that we make are rooted in belief systems that we have, right? So it all comes back to our thoughts, ideas, and beliefs, which, if you study the psyche, you see that they're all a collection of archetypes. And when you look at this pandemic and you look at, for example, like you were talking about why people don't heal, I absolutely love Caroline Miss's work, where Caroline Miss talks about what she calls the 4 survival archetypes, which are the victim, the saboteur, the child, and the prostitute. And these 4 archetypes are the archetypes that she calls survival archetypes. And the reason for that is because these are the archetypes that show up when we're in survival mode, when we're under stress. These are the archetypes that we learned how to adopt and adapt to situations in which our sense of safety, security, and survival were threatened. So we either drop and play the powerless victim, or we self-sabotage out of fear, certain illusions, limiting belief systems. We revert back to childhood programmings and we act out the child archetype, or we prostitute ourselves, which means we compromise or negotiate ourselves. So if you ask the question, well, why don't people heal, or why some people don't heal, you can usually track it back to these 4 survival archetypes. And remember, archetypes are collective patterns, they're not personal things. So if we look at the pandemic as a whole through an archetypal lens, we can say, okay, what's the first thing that happened? We were told there's a virus, there's a perpetrator, you guys are the victim. The only thing you can do is stay home, wear a mask, social distance, and wait for a vaccine. So you're the disempowered victim. The virus is the perpetrator, and the vaccine would be the rescuer archetype. Right? So there's the victim archetype. Then what we do is we start self-sabotaging. People start eating like crap, they stop exercising, they start sabotaging their own constitutional rights. So there's the saboteur archetype that gives all of their power away in times of fear. The child archetype, who's always looking for an authority figure to tell them what to do, a mother or father archetype. There's the child archetype, us waiting for authority figures, politicians, doctors, whoever. And then there's the prostitute archetype, which is, if we look at it collectively, what do we do for financial gain, safety and security, and where do we compromise our values as a result of that? So there's compromise and negotiation from the prostitute archetype. And a lot of the kind of pharmaceutical industry, a lot of what we saw with the pandemic, that's the classic prostitute archetype, where we abandon our values and we simply kind of give ourselves away for financial gain, safety and security, etc. So that's the first lens I like to look at things from, is from an archetypal lens, because the archetypes are really the primal roles or patterns that we act out in relationships, right? They're kind of like, it's kind of like the language of the psyche that we all speak. So if you can see it from an archetypal lens, then you can really see from a higher vantage point what the actual patterns that are being played out are. And what you realize is everyone has an inner victim, everyone has a saboteur, everyone has an inner child, and everyone has a prostitute. There's a light and a shadow side to all these archetypes. They're not all bad, right? For example, the light side of the victim is acknowledge when you're being victimized and do something about it. Like if you're in an abusive relationship, to say, oh, I'm not a victim, that would be silly. You would want to say, yeah, I'm being victimized here, and now I need to get out of the relationship. So that's the light side of the empowered victim. But what we're seeing chronically is chronically playing the victim. That's very different, right? The light side of the saboteur is sabotage what's not working for you anymore, right? But the shadow side of the saboteur is the fear, the illusions, and the self-sabotage that we kind of act out chronically. The light side of the child is being childlike, being playful. But the shadow side is being childish and not taking self-responsibility. The light side of the prostitute would be empowered negotiation in the form of transaction of like, this is what I have to offer you, and this is what I expect in return. So there's empowered negotiation and transaction. That's the light side of the prostitute. The shadow side is wearing the I'm for sale sign on your forehead, right? So if you look at the pandemic and you look at why people lose weight and then take steps backwards, or they start eating well and then they sabotage, or whatever it might be, it usually comes back to where they're feeling victimized in their life, where and why they're self-sabotaging out of fear, where they're playing the childhood or the child archetype, a lot of times that shows up with the client coach relationship. Is as soon as they don't have the coach anymore, they don't have the parent figure that's kind of telling the child archetype what to do. So they have a hard time making empowered choices for themselves. And then the prostitute archetype is where we're constantly compromising, negotiating, people pleasing, and giving our power away, so to speak. So in a nutshell, these archetypes are our relationship with our power. And if you look at the kind of like collective pattern over the course of the last few years, and if you look into why people don't heal, it's all their relationship with their own power. A lot of us, until we heal these archetypes, are deathly afraid of our own power, right? So that's why we outsource our power. So if you want to really track it back, I always start with these survival archetypes.
Well, why do you feel like, of course, no absolutes, and it's tough to kind of talk about these kind of subjects unless you have like a specific example in mind, like right in front of you, and you can kind of break down that case example. But why do you feel the bulk of majority of people, and I would say easily, like just based on that metabolic study, and also just like you don't even need studies. I mean, literally go out like anywhere in America these days, and 9 out of 10 people you run into are full of like obesity and disease, like mental and physical pain. You don't even need to study to confirm that. Just literally, it's almost the weekend now. Go out anywhere and that's all you'll see. But why do you feel like the bulk majority of like people play out like the negative aspects of these archetypes that you're mentioning chronically? You know, like why not just like why would you pick like situations that definitely don't benefit you positively in any way? And a lot of times I feel a good percentage of the time they could possibly understand that their behavior is hurting them, it's not benefiting them in any way, but they still continue to do that behavior.
Well, that's where I always, if I were working with a client that was struggling with this, which I've worked with many, the question you always want to ask that client, or if it's yourself, ask yourself is, what part of me is benefiting by not healing? That's the $1 million question. What part of me is benefiting by not healing? And we can go through like very specific kind of like case examples. Like, for example, say you have a client that comes to you with lower back pain, and you write them a diet program, an exercise program, a lifestyle program, and they continue to not do it. Well, then if you ask them, well, these exercises are going to help you, the dietary changes are going to help reduce the inflammation in your body, and the lifestyle changes are going to really help you get out of pain. Well, if you look into it deeply, that person does not enjoy their job. They chose a career that they really do not enjoy. They don't like their coworkers. They don't like their work environment. And with their chronic pain, they're getting paid time off to go to physical therapy, massage therapy, and all of these healthcare services, and they're getting taken care of, right? So healing and getting rid of pain is actually a threat to them because they don't want to have to go back to the job that they don't like. They're getting paid to not go to work and get taken care of by a lot of people that are listening to them, holding compassionate space for them. So a lot of people get a lot of emotional needs met by not healing. A lot of people get financial needs met by not healing. But the $1 million question is, what part of you is benefiting by not actually healing and experiencing optimal health? A lot of people, this is what's called secondary gain. A lot of people receive more love, compassion, and empathy from their family and friends when they're sick, where when they're actually healthy, there's a part of them that's like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting those same emotional needs met. So that's a challenging thing to look at, but a really important one. And that's the saboteur archetype of what part of me is benefiting, what part of me has secondary gain in actually staying sick and not healing. So that's another archetypal lens to look through. But if you look at it just kind of from a more basic standpoint, I mean, our food systems are hijacked, our information consumption is very much censored. our sedentary lifestyle, our, environments and the toxicity. I mean, you can really kind of look at it from so many different lenses, whether it be environmental, financial, information technology. I mean, the amount of information people are consuming in a day is more than a lifetime with, compared to our ancestors. So the amount of programming that's coming in just through our devices on an ongoing basis, and most of that information is not supporting health and well-being. Most of the information that people are consuming and getting is not the stuff we're talking about. It's on television, and the people that get the most airtime are the people that are, selling a lot of the junk food and the pharmaceuticals and whatnot. So I think that's an obvious factor. Also, when it comes to our current culture, our culture is addicted to complexity, right? Our ego mind, especially with our kind of modern day technological advances and kind of like the age of science, our egos have become very addicted to complexity. And we think, oh, if I have a complex problem, then there must be a complex solution.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is there's an overlooking of the basics. There's an overlooking of the power of simplicity. That's why Paul Chek is such a powerful teacher, is because he dials in the basics. Like we were taught in HLC, the 4 doctors and the 6 foundation principles. A lot of people have been indoctrinated into the technological, scientific kind of modern day world where if it's not a complex solution, they don't buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's an addiction to complexity that has resulted in a huge kind of overlooking of simplicity and the power of the basics, like good sleep, clean water, organic food, getting your feet on the ground, spending time in nature, just moving your body, just the basic stuff that you and I know. There's an overlooking of that because of the addiction to complexity. And also there's a difference between healing and curing, right? Our kind of mainstream medical model and healthcare system is based on a cure, not healing, right? Healing is something that happens internally. Curing is something that you get exogenously or from the outside. And a cure is honestly, for most people who are really stressed out, it's simple, and it's easy. It's simple, easy, and comfortable.
But
right?
doesn't actually provide any healing. That's
It doesn't. But the simplicity of, oh, just take this and you'll get this result. It's convenient. You can stay in your comfort zone. And remember that when a culture is under chronic stress, which our culture is chronically in that sympathetic fight or flight state, every person is trapped in their default mode network, right? The default mode network being the part of your brain that says, do what you've always done, believe what you've always believed, think what you've always thought, behave the way you've always behaved because it's kept you alive until now. So anything that's new, novel, or different is actually a threat to your survival. So when people are in that chronic sympathetic state, which most people are these days with our fast-paced, kind of highly or overly stimulated lifestyle, people's ability to think differently and make a new choice that ability is kind of shut down if their nervous system is kind of in that kind of fight or flight state. This is why Paul also says, when you're running from a lion, it's not a good idea to throw in a cartwheel, right? Throwing in a cartwheel means doing something different, right? Doing something creative. Doing something creative means doing something new, novel, or different. Where most people are running from the metaphorical lion in their life, whether it be financial stress, unresolved trauma, relationship stress, whatever it is. So their ability to throw in a cartwheel or make a different choice is kind of shut down when they're in that default mode network all the time.
Yeah, and kind of going back, rewinding a little bit in terms of what you said, because I know the majority of people that hear this episode are going to go like, oh yeah, I have that down, my sleep, my eating. But then when you really evaluate their basic logs, it's like a mess, Like, for example, even with something as simple as sleeping, okay, So your body basically repairs itself physically from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and mentally from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. But how many people are actually sleeping in that time interval? Even the people that say like, oh yeah, I go to sleep at 10, but really they're in bed at 10, but they don't actually fall asleep until 11. And they pretty much lose, like, even in that perfect scenario, about like 1 day of physical repair time per week of sleep, which has a detrimental effect on your health. And then when, obviously it's a joke when people say, when the average person says like, oh, I'm eating healthy, that's like, you ask them like, oh, what do you mean by healthy? They're like, oh, I cut my calories, like something like ridiculous or something like trendy, like, oh, I'm trying fasting, but they're like still eating at fast food with their coworkers, even going to restaurants who basically just sells like shit food anyways. But going back to your point, I was actually raised by my grandmother for the first like 10 years or so of my life on an off-grid farm in Ukraine, and just coincidentally learned about the basics of the basics and mastering them. Because I look at my grandmother, she lived until she was 87, and she didn't go to the doctors. She only went to the doctors one time, and that's to give birth to my mom, and that's literally it. And she was in great health her entire life. She didn't have a 401k plan. She didn't have a medical plan. She didn't have a life guru, personal trainer, or whatever. But that's just an example of like, dude, if you just master the basics and literally live like a human being, that literally is all you have to do, not only to look great, but also to feel great. And I do feel like you're totally right. Like, people are way overcomplicating health and wellness, because at the end of the day, I feel just they're just not willing to look in the mirror and go like, dude, I'm causing all my problems, most of my problems, 99.9% of my problems in most cases. And because that would inevitably force them to A, take responsibility, which most people aren't willing to do, and B, actually force them to look for real answers, which ironically are not that easy, especially if you're fully embedded and fully locked into the matrix of, like, for example, if you're not dying for your job, you're not doing your job, the typical corporate mentality. And it's totally like where pathology is normalized. Oftentimes you say like, oh, where a person's very stressed, they do become very myopic, and they just are survival mode. I got this deadline, I got this boss to please. I got, this coworker I got to deal with. I got to get this bill paid, that bill paid. I think Robert Kiyosaki, in one of his new podcasts, he said like 60% of Americans have only $1,000 to their name. That's like basically a small car problem away from basically having no money whatsoever. And of course, that's going to put you in a super high stress, super myopic state where you just don't think clearly. You're just trying to survive day to day. But what's your take? I mean, you've been kind of like in the health field for a long time. And do you ever feel like sad seeing the bulk majority of people and how hopelessly lost and dependent they are on the matrix, which is basically a society that's right now like a swamp of mental and physical pathology? Because a lot of them are just unconscious about it. They totally think it's normal. That's the scary part. Yeah. Like when I used to do corporate health lectures, I gave a lot of people the HAQ, you know what that is. And before, they would fill it out, they would tell me, I'm doing my 1,000 steps, I feel healthy. And then you get back their HAQ, it's all in the red everywhere. They're like on 2 pharmaceutical drugs. They have like a huge gut, and for them, that is actually healthy, because that might be healthy compared to the person working next to them, which is a complete like nuclear train wreck for the most part.
Yeah. There's some days where I'm very concerned, and I don't want to say I feel hopeless or helpless, like there's no turning back. But yeah, some days it is challenging and it's overwhelming to kind of see how far things have gotten in one direction. And do we have enough momentum to kind of swing it back the other way? I mean, if you listen to, Zach Bush talks a lot about, the health of our soil and our environment, and we're facing an extinction here pretty soon if we don't kind of rewrite the ship. So from that lens, yeah, it's very concerning. And then I always try and balance that with a higher vantage point, which is we are all human beings, but there's a soul within each one of us, an energetic being that has been here for eternity and will continue to do this many times. So whether it's just, like Paul Chek says, Earth being a classroom for souls to come to learn and evolve and engage themselves and understand all these archetypes, and sometimes it gets messy, but hey, we're going to do it a million times over again. So from that vantage point of more of the soul's lens or the soul's view, then I am not that concerned because I can see the bigger picture. But on a day-to-day basis, yes, it's very concerning, because the truth is, when you're not healthy, you're not free, right? And we're all here to experience freedom, and we're all here to experience our highest potential. And we all came here with contracts and purpose and a mission to carry out. I firmly believe that. I don't think any soul is here by accident, right? So the more health we have, the more energy, vitality, and personal power we have to carry out that purpose and to fulfill our contracts. So when it's time for us to leave the body and see what's next behind the veil and enter the mystery, we're ready to let go. For me, I want to be able to let go knowing that I did everything I possibly could on this earth plane, in this body, to really fulfill my life's purpose and my life's mission. And I need enough health and vitality to do that, right? So I don't think enough people are really connected to their soul and connected to their sense of purpose and why they're here. So our cultural myth has become that of consumerism, right? And when the cultural myth becomes less about purpose and how can I be a co-creator and contributor to this life and this planet and leave the garden a little bit more beautiful than how I found it, then we're just here to consume and consume and consume. And that's where we get stuck in the world of instant gratification. And that's where making dietary changes and going to bed on time rather than staying up and watching Netflix and this and that, when you're not connected to purpose, then it's all based on instant gratification and consumerism. So, it's the cultural myth that needs to change. And that's where someone like Zach Bush, who talks a lot about our indigenous people being very connected to the land and making sure that we're putting back as much as we're taking and that we're creating just as much as we're consuming. And we're all connected to a sense of purpose. Like if you study blue zones, the longevity hotspots around the world where you don't see as much chronic disease, you see a lot of centenarians. Like, sure, you see good diet and lifestyle, but you see alcohol consumption. You don't see, like, people aren't going to the gym, they're active, but you don't see like formal exercise. But what you do see is a connection to the land, a connection to community, and a connection to a sense of purpose and a connection to a spiritual life. So when you have that sense of connection, you know where you exist as a puzzle piece within the fabric of creation. And you don't see yourself as just a cosmic mistake that's just here to consume and gratify oneself. I have a unique purpose within the fabric of life. So I better take care of myself so I can actually live that out. So I think there's that kind of missing piece of the soul in each individual. And most people are spending too much time on social media and on devices and on television and moving at such fast of a pace that they don't take enough time to quiet themselves, go within and actually connect to that part of themselves. So I think there's a lot of layers to it, but that's my delusional opinion.
No, it's not delusional at all. And I feel like a lot of times people do use like social media, Netflix to ironically distract themselves from a life they don't want, to buy themselves more time. And there's so many ways you could distract yourself. But ironically, it also just reinforces that negative cycle, because they don't then take action on doing the things they actually want to do. And B, it leaves them with less time to take action on doing the things they want to do, because especially if you take into consideration like an 8-hour workday, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I always say, like, especially with fat loss clients, I use kind of like an etiology tree, like a lot of times,
Mhm.
and I got this from Paul Chek.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it's like people are like, well, I have body fat. Like, what do they usually go? I need to like change my diet and exercise more, and that seems like really all you have to do on paper.
Mhm.
And I would say, yes, that might be all you have to do to lose weight, just to find yourself regaining it about 2 or 3 years later.
Mhm.
But if they kind of go deeper, it goes into exactly what you're talking about. Okay, so you got excessive body fat or whatever. You can put anything at the top: depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And okay, that's a symptom of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, obviously. But why would a person like want to self-abuse themselves that way? Well, it's a belief system that doesn't facilitate health conscious choices, like
Yes.
nutrition and lifestyle choices. But why would a person want to, instill that belief system and reinforce it even further? And it's usually like with three different variables. They definitely have a story gap, like you
Mhm.
mentioned. There's definitely, in short, the story gap is like, I want to be an artist, but I'm a lawyer, For example, there could be a myriad of different examples. They definitely, most often I find, have a love-hate relationship in their life as well. So on
Mhm.
top of working a job they don't like, they come home to a spouse they actually don't like as well.
Mhm.
Maybe, for example, they did genuinely love them initially, but 10 years later, love fades and people take different paths, and they continue to stay in that relationship for one reason or another: financial, religious, social pressure, kids, whatever. And then the third one, obviously, it's like you have a feeling of emptiness. There's a sense that, like, oh, the more I accomplish, the more empty I actually feel.
Yes.
And the fourth one, and this is what keeps people in those loops, in my opinion, is that mental and physical pathology has been totally normalized.
Mhm.
So like I went to Costco for the first time in a while, like a week ago, and literally I even looked around, I was the only male in that whole entire store that didn't have huge gyno and like a huge gut.
Mhm.
There must have been hundreds of people there. It was a Sunday. It was like packed. It was like shoulder to shoulder. And that's just how the average person looks. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's just aesthetically unappealing. But that kind of appearance is a byproduct of a lot of mental and physical pain experienced in a person's life. And it's totally normal now, which I feel is the saddest part of all, because people are totally just unconsciously living a life of pathology. And it all originates to what you just mentioned right now: a disconnect in core values, and also just a lack of even understanding what a person's core values are. Like I do a lot of that with clients, and I find even a lot of 40, 50-year-old people, when you ask them to identify their core values, they've never done it. They're like, oh, I never thought about it before. What I actually wanted to do, or what kind of resonates with my spirit.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your experience is with that.
Yeah. A couple things. Number one, I always tell my clients, don't set goals, set values. And especially when it comes to weight loss, there's nothing wrong with setting a weight loss goal, but when you have a goal without values, remember, goals are always for the future. You're always setting goals for the future. But when you establish core values, values are for now. Values are what are the standards or codes of conduct that you live according to every single day, right? So a lot of people, and I've seen this with weight loss, fat loss, a lot of people set goals just to sabotage them for emotional reasons, to reinforce shame, to to continue the chase. A lot of people who are in the fat loss and weight loss, they love the chase of like the 10 pounds. So if they actually reach the goal, there's no more chase. So a lot of people actually like to sabotage their goals because they're afraid of actually achieving them, because it's then like, okay, now what? I don't really have anything else that's fulfilling in my life. So if I sabotage it, then I can continue focusing on that goal that I keep pushing away. So I always tell people, set values, not goals, right? So you're always in the present, you're not always for the future. And Another thing is when people don't have a sense of purpose in their life, they don't really know, okay, if I heal, lose the weight, and get healthy, the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to reclaim a lot of energy and I'm going to reclaim a lot of personal power. But the truth is that if someone doesn't know how they're going to reinvest that energy and power, there's a part of them that says, I'd rather not have it than have it and not know how to utilize it.
Mhm,
Right?
mhm.
Imagine someone sitting on a couch all day and not knowing why they want to get up from the couch and, go do something productive. And imagine that person like drinking like 10 cups of coffee. Sitting on that couch is going to be miserable because after 10 cups of coffee, you're going to have so much energy that you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to use all this energy. I'd rather not have this energy because I just want to sit on the couch. Right? You're kind of like a Ferrari stuck in traffic with all this horsepower, and the car is literally shaking and it has no way of actually channeling that energy. So a lot of people will dump their energy into an addiction because they'd rather not have the energy than have it and not know how to use it. Right?
Mhm.
So that's another element. Also, one thing you said is that being overweight and having a big gut has become the norm, right? And when people are under stress or just in general, people shift back into their root chakra mindset, right? They're kind of primal, tribal, which we saw that a lot with the pandemic. And the first thing that people look for is a sense of belonging. So unfortunately, being healthy and living a healthy lifestyle and making optimal choices for your health, that actually might be a threat to your sense of belonging within a sick community. So when people are under stress and they revert back to more of their kind of like tribal mindset, the sense of belonging is what allows them to feel safe. So being unhealthy actually allows them to maintain that need to get met. Also, when we look at it from an archetypal lens, there's also a lot of religious programming. I've worked with a lot of clients who do not feed themselves well. They don't make time for exercise. They don't get to bed on time. They don't turn their phone off at night. And the reason for that is they're programmed to believe that they're always supposed to be doing for everybody else, and that it's a sin to actually do for themselves because it's selfish. Right? So there's what's called the martyr archetype. And Christianity, which can be a beautiful religion, it has its shadow, is based on the martyr archetype. Jesus was the epitome of the martyr, which is self-sacrifice. But the story of Jesus was self-sacrifice for the greater good. Whether you believe in that or not, it doesn't matter. That's archetypally what it represents. So most people take that archetype and act it out in the shadow form, which is, I'm always doing for others, but now I feel victimized. I victimize myself and now I can't take care of myself. I don't have enough time to go to the gym. I don't have enough time to cook my meals. I'm always doing this or doing that for everybody else. There's the victimized martyr, right? So there's the religious programming. So that's why, for me, looking through the lens of the archetypal landscape really brings it right back to the root cause.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you said in terms of, I find this is one of the things that lead to especially excessive weight gain, but any health issue to begin with.
Any health
And
issue.
excessive weight gain leads to a myriad of health issues. A lot of people are like, once again, still focused on just the aesthetics thing, like, oh, it just doesn't look good. And there's no other negative, but no, there are like a myriad of like mental and physical negatives that occur with being excessively overweight. But yeah, I always tell clients like, hey, you got to have your needs met first.
Yes.
Whenever you want something to last long term and you don't want to be miserable in that situation, whether it be a career or a relationship. And I know it sounds counterintuitive because you're always kind of raised on like, take care of this guy, do this, take care of the community, et cetera, et cetera. But dude, if you don't have your needs met first, and you're not very, first of all, clear on those needs, which is a problem because most people are just, like I mentioned, there are a lot of like 40 or 50-year-olds that aren't even clear on their core values. And if you don't know that, like, there is no blueprint to your existence. You're just kind of walking blind in the forest without any light whatsoever. And you don't know what to say yes to, what to say no to. You kind of just are opportunist, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what happens. It's like, dude, it's like you have to be selfish because you have to have your needs met first, because if they're not, a good example is like, let's say there is that story gap like we mentioned, like let's say a person wants to genuinely be an artist, or like in my situation, I always wanted to work 3 days a week, even since college. And a lot of my friends, especially when we're graduating, was on the tail end of that huge mortgage collapse. And a lot of my friends are like, dude, you're going to work for yourself in only 3 days a week. Yeah, right. No one's even hiring. And I was going to work as like a holistic health coach and personal trainer on top of that, which is kind of more of a luxury. I think it's a necessity, but it's more of like a luxury service for most people, et cetera, et cetera. But imagine like you want to work 3 days a week, but you're working 6 days a week at a job. So there's a story gap right there. You might be able to do it for a little bit and be happy. Don't get me wrong, especially if you keep getting pay increases or title increases or something like that. They'll give you kind of these sugar highs, but eventually, you're being fake to yourself. And it erodes you at the cellular level and causes you to adapt maladaptive belief systems that lead to poor lifestyle, poor nutrition choices that lead to excessive body fat. And dude, at that point, it's like no boot camp, fitness program, trendy diet, or whatever the hell people try, fat loss pills, is going to help you. You're just going to be on a downward spiral, maybe with some quick hopes and peaks of success here and there, a little bit with huge valleys of failure in between. And that's it. You really kind of like have to get that part right in terms of, setting those core values, being super clear about them, and then kind of living true to that. That is the foundation. You got to do more than that, obviously, but that sets the foundation to everything you do.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. I'm curious, have you ever been confused by the labels in the grocery store? In Yevgeny's book, he demystifies the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. He also covers how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and other related topics. It's a beautifully illustrated, non-technical read that comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning materials. Jump on Amazon and check out the book titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Eugene Trufkin. Now let's dive back into the podcast.
Yeah. So a couple things. I mean, I love the old saying, you can't come drink from a dry well, right? So if you're not taking care of yourself, you don't really have much to offer anybody else. And the truth is that if you keep giving and giving and giving to others, and you're not giving to yourself, eventually you're going to reach a state of resentment. And once you reach a state of resentment, you're now going to either wake up and make changes, or you're going to start self-medicating the resentment. And that's where a lot of people start putting on the weight, is the resentment is part of the martyr archetype, which is I'm giving to everyone else. I don't have enough time for myself. So now I start resenting the people in my life. And now I start eating a bunch of junk food as a way of really self-medicating, self-pity, not taking responsibility. So that's an important thing to remember. And, a lot of the spiritual teachings are misinterpreted. A lot of the religious teachings are misinterpreted. And a lot of the people that were teaching these things, like Christ or whoever, these were enlightened beings. These were beings of unconditional love that really knew who and what they were and were connected to spirit on such a deep level that they were able to give from, in unlimited supply of energy and vitality. But even them, they had meditation and yoga and all of these deep practices that inspired and energized them from a very deep place, from their core. So most people don't have the level of spiritual development to actually embody unconditional love, right? Unconditional love is something that is what we're all trying to attain, but can be very dangerous if you haven't yet learned the nature of conditional love, right? We all have conditions, right? We all have conditions of how we need to get our needs met. And that's why we have to have values. And if we try and skip conditional love and say, oh, it's the unconditionally loving mother who's always doing for everybody, that's not unconditional love, right? You still have conditions. And the reason you have conditions is because of the evidence you have conditions is you can feel the resentment inside of you. If you can feel the resentment inside of you of I'm giving to everyone else and I'm not having enough time and energy for myself, there's a condition there. So we have to master the nature of conditional love before we can move to unconditional love, right? And unconditional love does not mean not taking care of yourself, because that's not very loving to yourself either, right? And that's why, it's in the teachings of Christ, it says, love thy neighbor as thyself, right? That's actually a dangerous teaching because most people aren't loving themselves. The prerequisite to love thy neighbor as thyself is to actually love yourself. Most people are their own worst enemy and actually are quite abusive to themselves. So if most people are actually loving others the way they're loving themselves, we're not having very healthy relationships. So this is why Paul Chek always says, I before we and we before all, right? I, your relationship with yourself, number one. We, your relationship with one other person. And that's where you set conditions. That's where you have conditional love of I'm loving you when I'm doing all these things for you. You love me when you're doing these things for me. And there is a transactional nature there of this is how we get our needs met. And then only then can we move to the all level, which is how we're in relationship with the greater whole. But if we don't start with I before we go to we, and we before we go to all, you can't skip any steps in spiritual development or in relationships, because you're just going to end up in one of these shadow expressions of the archetypes: the victim, the saboteur, the child, the prostitute, the martyr, the rescuer, etc. Right? So, that's where we always have to start with ourself first. And once we take care of ourselves and fill our cup up to the point where our cup is overflowing, then other people will come drink from your well. You'll be a natural healing force to the people around you because you'll be an embodiment of what everyone else needs to be doing, right? And you can be actually the silent teacher and the silent lover, where you don't actually have to say anything. You just lead by example, and other people can smell it on you. They're like, oh, I want some of that too. This person's energy, this person's vitality, like, what are you doing? This is why I've learned it's not a good idea to try and coach family. And
Yes.
the reason for that is they're not going to listen to what you tell them to do, but they will listen to what you show them by how you live yourself. I have the healer archetype, and the shadow side of the healer archetype is me going around trying to fix everybody, right? Which started with and included my family members, which is not a good idea. It only leads to conflict and resentment and, puts a wedge in your relationship. So I only help family members if they ask for help. If they're not asking for help, I, engage them from a loving space, but I just focus on my own work. I focus on my own health and my own choices. I don't tell anyone in my family what to do. If they see something that's really working for me, they're going to get curious about it. And if they're curious about it, they'll come to me, they'll ask me, and then I'll offer some advice. So that's just a side note of don't try and fix family members unless they come to you and ask you for help. This is why Paul says the fastest way to health is to be honest with yourself. And you talked about the story gap a lot. The story gap is really a reflection of not being honest with yourself, right? So if we really sit down or look in the mirror and say, where am I not being fully honest with myself? If we're really honest about it, we'll arrive at the answer. It might be, I hate my job. It might be, this relationship is not something I want to be in anymore. It might be, I need to find a different environment to live in. But the fastest way to health is really being brutally honest. And, I think that's really the truth of it. And also, if you don't start with I before we and all, and you don't have the self in selfish before you become selfless, you don't actually have a self, right? If you're not taking care of yourself and connected to yourself, and you're always doing for others, you're not actually connected to a self inside of you. And when that happens, what happens is your sense of self becomes so externalized. Your sense of self is now in your bank account. Your sense of self is now in the approval you get from others. Your sense of self is now in the clothes that you wear, or the title that you have, or the reputation that you have, or the people pleasing of others, or if you externalize your sense of self, now you're micromanaging everyone else's experience of you, because you don't actually have an internal sense of self. It's all externalized. And that results in a lot of self-sabotage and prostituting and that child archetype, etc. So there's infinite number of ways and reasons why you have to give to yourself first before you can give to anybody else. If I don't take care of myself as a coach, when I get on Zoom with a client, if my head's not clear and I don't have energy, I have nothing to offer my client. So if I'm not taking care of myself, my work goes down the drain.
Yeah.
My work is dependent on my vitality, my mental clarity, my physical energy. I do a lot of energy medicine work, a lot of energy healing. So in order for me to be a channel or a vessel for energy to move through me and support a client in their healing, I have to be a clean vessel, right? I have to tune my instrument, being my body-mind complex, in order to be a channel or a vessel for energy to actually flow through me. So in the line of work that we're in, we know for sure that being healthy and vital and clear is a prerequisite to even doing your work well.
Well, that's funny you mention it, because I don't know if you've seen the bulk majority of health professionals, but they're definitely not living true to being healthy health professionals. I don't know if you've ever gone to like a medical convention. It should be retitled like an obesity and disease convention. I feel that's one of the issues, because like you mentioned, if you're a shining light and just living the example, people would want to know what you're doing, and kind of imitate that, because at the end of the day, as Aristotle would say, happiness is the unconditional goal of most people. That is what you're after for its unconditional sake of just being happy. Now, how do you get there? There's like a million trillion different stories of everyone has their own opinion of how you get there, for example. But yeah, if people see you shining, if people see you healthy, like very, just happy in life, obviously they're going to want to know like, oh, I wonder what he's doing. But I feel like that's one of the issues. So like, look at it from a general consumer's perspective, like, let's say we're talking about those 9 out of 10 American adults that are metabolically unhealthy, or like the people I mentioned at Costco, for example. Let's say if one of them genuinely does want to heal themselves, obviously they don't have the intensive education we do of investing. I've been doing it for 15 years, but really I even grew up with my grandmother for the first 10 years. So I've been doing it on the off-grid farm. So I've been basically in the health and wellness area for about like 37 years already, pretty much my whole entire life. And obviously, people have other trades, etc. And they don't have like, they're not seeing the world we're seeing. They're seeing a completely different world. So what do they have? What does the average consumer have? Like, for the most part, most of them are just going to go to their local doctor. She's going to spend like 5 minutes with them. The doctor themselves probably way overworked, way overdrugged themselves on a terrible diet, overweight. And they're just going to give them, some drugs. And then, oh, I'll see you in 3 months. Let's see how it goes. We'll take another blood panel and see how you're panning out. And if you don't kill yourself, oh, cool, that's plus, Then we'll give you a few more drugs to counter the side effects of these drugs that we gave you initially. But then I feel it's also equally confusing on the fitness side. I'm not going to leave that side out. It's like, what do people have there? They're going to log into like Instagram, or something like that. And obviously they're going to probably gravitate towards the more popular accounts. And a lot of the popular accounts, obviously, if you want to be popular, as Joseph Goebbels would say, you have to have your message resonate with the dumbest person in your following. Thus, you have to dumb everything down And unfortunately, even the most minor mental and physical health issues, there are no absolutes. Everyone is going to have a different resolution or solution for that issue. And B, it can't be explained in like a 1 or 2 quick sentences, or even a 10-minute video, or even an hour video, because unless you have the person literally in front of you, you cannot give advice to the person, because the situation's different. There are no absolutes. And it's kind of sometimes shameful to see, especially like medical doctors with popular profiles talking in absolutes, like, hey, I'm not going to mention any name, but hey, if you have this back pain problem, just do this one thing. That's literally freaking ridiculous and misguiding and selling people false hope just for clicks. And it's just very underhanded, and it's not right. And it's totally misleading people. I don't know what your situation is, or what your take is on that.
Well, I think when it comes to specialty issues like back pain, thyroid, gut, whatever it might be, there is no, as we all know, there's no one size fits all approach. But I do think there's very simple, low hanging fruit that everybody can kind of check the boxes of, which is, are you drinking quality water? Are you just eating organic food? Are you moving your body for at least 30 minutes each day, even if it's just going for a walk? Are you getting outside? Are you getting to bed by, 9:30, 10 o'clock, or even 10:30? So I think if people started with, 4 doctors, 6 foundation principles like Paul teaches, you can start there. And then if you need to kind of fine tune and fine tailor an approach to an individual, whether it's for back pain, weight loss, gut issues, whatever it is, then you can kind of take a deeper dive. But what I have found is, you probably have found too, there's so much low hanging fruit for most individuals that does not really have to be that specific, whether it's just drinking more water and less Diet Coke, or eating more organic food and less packaged food, or moving your body and going for a walk every day, or just getting to bed at 10 instead of midnight. Like, that stuff goes such a long way. I mean, that's not rocket science, but that circles back to something that we started with earlier, which is our culture's addiction to complexity. When most people hear, oh, I have to drink clean water, half my body weight, eat organic food, walk 30 minutes a day, and go to bed at 10 o'clock. It's really that simple? No way. Like, it's got to be more than that. And it's almost like the ego doesn't want to feel dumb, right? The ego doesn't want to be like, oh my gosh, it was that simple. No.
Why have I been fucking myself for so long?
Yeah. Like, it can't be that easy. It's got to be more complex. There has to be like some, supplement or pharmaceutical or some specialty diet or some like crazy exercise routine. That's got to be the answer. It can't be just like going for a walk, getting to bed, drinking water, eating organic food. It can't be that. So that's where understanding the nature of the mind, the psyche, and the ego is really important. And the truth is that most people who are teaching that, like, myself, yourself, I mean, Paul Chek's one of the very few who teaches the basics and gets a good amount of airtime teaching the basics. Obviously Paul teaches a lot more than just the basics. His system can be quite complex, because a lot of us, we work with kind of like the medical failures, the cases that, have kind of fallen through the cracks. But at the root of the teachings that you and I have learned, it's Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, Dr. Happiness, nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. And, when you tell someone who has chronic neck pain that is on a bunch of, pain meds, and maybe has had a surgery or two, or, on their MRI, there's maybe some, disc bulge or whatever it might be. And you tell them, hey, your neck pain, it's actually because of your breathing pattern. They're going to be like, what? Like, that's crazy. If you act, but then you can explain to them like, hey, well, when you're not using your diaphragm properly, you're using your accessory respiratory muscles in your neck, which can hypertrophy and create all sorts of issues like migraines, neck pain, thoracic outlet syndrome, things like that. So you can teach them, but on social media, on the internet, most people that are teaching the basics like that aren't really getting the airtime because it's not sexy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not sexy teaching people to drink clean water, eat organic food, go for a walk, and get to bed at 10 p.m. But the truth is, the power is in the simplicity. And, you know, that's why, you know, I love Eastern philosophy, you know, much more than Western philosophy. Is the Eastern teachings of, you know, Zen Buddhism and Taoism and all of those teachings, it's all rooted in simplicity. It's all rooted in getting back to the basics and getting rid of all these crazy complex ideas that are not really working so well. You know, so it is our
Not only
Western
not,
mind.
sorry to interrupt, not only
Yeah.
working well, it's just not working.
Not working at all. Yeah. But the truth is that, you know, the prostitute archetype, which can be very money driven, is we create a problem and then we create a solution to the problem. But then the solution comes with its own problems. So then we create a solution to the problem of the solution. And, you know, each time you remove yourself from the original problem, you actually make more money. So a lot of the kind of pharmaceutical industry, even the food industry, a lot of it's really based in that. You know, it's find a problem, create a solution, then there's going to be a problem with the solution. So now you create a solution to the problem of the solution. And, you know, that's how a lot of profit is made. So, you know, we're all coming face to face with the collective shadow. And the collective shadow is, you know, the parts of ourselves that we didn't want to look at for a very long time, but is now bubbling up to the surface so we can actually see it in the mirror. And what's important for myself and a lot of people is, you know, as much as there is, you know, some perpetrators out there that are doing harm, it's important to understand that what we're seeing is the shadow of the collective. And each one of us is a part of the collective. So the truth is, I still buy things on Amazon. I still have a Gmail account and use a Google Calendar. So I'm still using a lot of the tools that a lot of people, sometimes including myself, kind of like demonize the individuals who are creating them. So it's important that when we're doing shadow work, we're not always just pointing the finger. We're willing to look at, hey, you know, a Bill Gates or a Fauci or a whoever, like, where does that version live inside of me? You know, where does that archetypal expression actually live inside of me? Maybe it be where, you know, I made a decision strictly out of financial gain, or maybe I was manipulative in some shape or fashion in communication in a relationship, or where I wasn't completely honest in something I was sharing with somebody, whatever it might be. You know, shadow work is really, you know, seeing the aspect of the perpetrator or the person you're kind of vilifying, seeing that version in yourself and being able to come face to face with it and heal that aspect of yourself. You know, so I think that takes some spiritual courage. And, you know, conversations like we're having gives us some framework to be able to do that work. Being like, oh yeah, I can really resonate with that martyr archetype, or oh, I can really resonate with when I play the victim or what I'm doing for everybody else, and, you know, actually using other people to avoid myself. You know, a lot of mothers might not want to see where they're using their children to avoid themselves and calling it unconditional love, right? That's some deep shadow work, right? Where you can see yourself as actually quite manipulative. And, you know, I think this whole pandemic is an opportunity for us to heal our shadow, you know, and I like the archetypal landscape as a way of doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I have like a few things you mentioned, like, oh, we deal with medical failures. I'm like,
Yeah,
dude, what failures? Most of the time, they don't even try.
yeah,
Of course, there are some amazing doctors. I don't want to put everyone under the same umbrella. And the
sure.
emergency staff, I love those guys. They're true like angels in the sky. But I mean, like, dude, if you're spending like 5, 10 minutes with your client and then throwing medication at them or medical drugs, I just like to call them drugs. They kind of put it under the marketing phrase of medicine, but really it's just like drugs. That's like not even trying. Of course, you're going to fail. And then, of
Yeah,
course, people are going to eventually, after spending thousands and thousands of dollars and decades of years, kind of just getting sicker and more obese on that model, eventually come to us, probably, hopefully. But I don't even see that as like trying. I'm like, I don't even know how you can go to school for so long and just practice that way. And I only kind of get upset with that because there was a point where I had two things happen. So one, I had clinical levels of social anxiety and generalized anxiety in like earlier college, kind of high school years. And I went to the doctors and I'm like, oh, I have this, and they didn't talk about like decreasing your workload, maybe getting rid of certain aspects of your type A personality, learning how to eat a little bit better, maybe not work out as much or as hard, etc., getting to sleep a better time. Like, oh yeah, here, just take this anti-anxiety medication. And
mhm,
because the way I was raised by my grandmother, I already knew kind of something didn't like vibe with me deep down inside. I already knew something was wrong with that model. So just out of coincidence, I didn't do it. And instead I took kind of like improv classes. I learned a lot about like health and wellness, like mental and physical health. I took acting classes to overcome just like social awkwardness, etc. Like something like this would have been impossible for me to do when I was like 18, 19.
me
I would
too.
just like go into a panic or something like that. And it took time. It wasn't easy, but hey, I was able to resolve it and do it like drug free. But I just kind of see that oftentimes as like the go-to. And honestly, everything has a place and time. And I'm not like anti-medical drugs. I just don't like seeing it as like the first course of action because of laziness. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Absolute laziness.
yeah. And the route you take actually involves stepping into discomfort. Like for me, I was bullied as a kid for being very quiet, for never speaking. So I've had a lot of woundedness around expressing myself, speaking in public, even doing podcasts. Like even before this podcast, I noticed, some nerves and emotions coming up just from my inner child. And it could be very easy for me to kind of just medicate those feelings and emotions. But I realized that real healing means stepping into the discomfort, stepping outside of your comfort zone, stepping into the unknown. And that's where, on a deep level, you start healing, you start expanding, and you start feeling empowered in yourself. And the truth is that our health and our vitality is directly connected to our sense of personal power, right? Our sense of personal power and our health, there's a direct correlation. And our health usually starts to decline when we start giving our power away to things outside of us, whether it be religion based, financially, in relationships, whatever it might be. The more we outsource our power, the more we give our energy and vitality away, because where you give your power away is where you give your energy away. And the more you're giving your power away, the more you're giving your vitality away, the less energy there is to actually just run your autonomic processes in your body and make good empowered choices. So what I like to tell a lot of people is, imagine each morning you wake up, and just like you have a financial bank account with a certain number of dollars in it, you have a bank account that's called personal power. And say you wake up and you have $100 worth of personal power. Each choice you make during the day, you either withdraw from your bank account so you have less, meaning giving your power away. You make an empowered choice, so either your bank account stays the same, or it might be you might have a little bit more. And at the end of the day, most people have made so many disempowered choices that at the end of the day, their bank account is running so low that their ability to make an empowered choice when they open their fridge in the evening of what they're going to have for dinner that night it's impossible, right? They gave their power away by going to a job that they hate. They gave their power away by, sitting on social media on their lunch break instead of going outside for a walk. They gave their power away by, something in their intimate relationship, maybe, answering the phone on their lunch break when they really needed the time for themselves to have a quiet meditation practice or whatever it might be. They disempowered themselves by deciding to not go to the gym that morning and instead, sit in front of the television for an hour. Whatever it might be, our health is really related to our personal power. So at the end of the day, assess, okay, if I started my day with $100 in my personal power bank account, what am I left with right now? And you can feel that energetically. You can feel inside of you when you've made a disempowered choice, and you can feel inside of you when you've made an empowered choice. One of my favorite teachers, his name's Matt Kahn. He's a brilliant spiritual teacher. And the way he talks about this is, he said, in any situation, when you arrive at that choice point, you're either making a dharmic choice or you're making a karmic choice. A dharmic choice is something that's really aligned with your purpose, that's really for your highest good and the good for everyone involved. And it's really the empowered choice that results in the expansion of yourself. The karmic choice is the patterns of self-sabotage that are the same choices you've made over and over again. And the old saying, when you keep doing what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. And the karmic choices are the ones that keep you safe and comfortable, but kind of stagnate your growth, right? So I like to tell people, are you making dharmic choices or karmic choices? Are you making choices that are feeding your personal power or disempowering you? And the more we disempower ourselves, the more karmic choices we make, the more we're going to end up in that saboteur archetype. So a lot of it really relates to our sense of personal power and where we give it away.
Yeah. I just feel to think the way you're thinking right now is going to be, I'm just looking at it from, once again, the average American's perspective. It's going to be really hard to get into that mindset. So if they continue, of course, you got to remember, where you go, there you are, right? So if you're creating your own problems, even if you leave your environment, your current environment is going to follow you, obviously. So keep that in mind. But I always say, dude, if you, especially with fat loss clients, if they stay in the same environment that they're in before they joined the fat loss program and even made a successful transformation, the chances of them relapsing is 90+%. Mm-hmm. I would say in a long enough time frame, almost 100%. It's kind of the equivalent of imagine someone finishes a drug rehab program successfully, and they go back to the neighborhood with the drug dealer, with their old druggy friends, etc. I mean, come on, you don't need to be a master psychologist to understand the chances of them relapsing is through the roof. And it's the same exact thing. To have that kind of clarity you're having, you almost have to start distancing and disconnecting yourself from the matrix. Imagine being in an average corporate environment these days. You're working 10 hours a day under high stress, high demands, will put you in a myopic state. Everyone around you is the same exact way. Yeah, so they're going to probably talk you out of, if you do want to leave the job, talk you out of doing it. They're like, well, it's safe. And yes, we're being emotionally abused basically and sacrificing so many of our core values to get this slight bit of security and safety, but it's okay. It's what needs to be done. It's what everyone's doing, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of like, crabs when they're in a bucket. If one crab tries to crawl out, the other one's kind of pulled them back in. Although it's not benefiting any of them to stay in that bucket, because if they're in the bucket, for sure, they're going to be in someone's dinner pretty soon, et cetera, et cetera. But I just feel it's kind of especially with the complexity thing you mentioned in terms of healthcare becoming very complex, and that's because I feel a lot of the health professionals for one reason or another. It could be financial. It could also just be that they're helplessly dependent on the matrix as well. Don't know how to think about, like, for example, let's say we have society, which in my opinion has become a swamp of like mental and physical pathology. I could easily objectively prove that, at least in America. And instead of like literally just using common sense and stepping out of the swamp, like they try to tinker and figure out complicated ways of how to exist in the swamp. And yes, it could actually get complicated at that point because it is very hard to optimize your mental and physical health living in that swamp, you know? But like, dude, I'm like, just step fucking out of the swamp for 1 second. And all of a sudden, those simple things that you mentioned, those basics, become very easy to attain. Yes, you could accomplish your goals climbing Mount Everest, you know? But wouldn't it be easier just to go for a walk at a local park? You know what I mean? Both
Yeah.
are obvious, but it's like one is far more sustainable than the other, especially when that pathology is being reinforced by that culture, you know? It's like you can't see anything else.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, when everyone's in that chronic sympathetic fight or flight state and in that default mode network, most people are willing to trade their freedom and empowerment for safety and comfort, right? So safety and comfort is what a lot of people kind of get trapped in and sabotage their freedom and empowerment. And the pandemic is an obvious example of that. But also, you know, when you talk about being in the swamp or being in a certain environment that facilitates a pathology, once you step outside of it, there's no turning back, right? So once you get a breath of fresh air and you step outside of your home environment or a certain relationship, a marriage, whatever, a job, whatever it might be, you know, this is why in a lot of health coaching programs or healing programs, there's high divorce rates. And the reason for that is when one significant other, let's say they're both in the swamp together, when one significant other starts making diet and lifestyle changes and they start exercising every day, they start eating organic food, they start going to bed on time, they start, you know, really taking care of themselves and empowering themselves, that person very often has no interest in being married to that person they were married with when they were in the swamp. So a lot of people might have the subconscious awareness of, if I really step outside of this swamp and make this change, everything's going to change. And if I'm not ready for everything changing, meaning I'm going to have to leave my marriage, change my job, find a new place to live, it's easier to kind of bury your head in the sand, right? So that's I believe happening on an unconscious level, is the awareness of, if I really peek my head up and get a breath of fresh air, there's no turning back. Because also, once you get out of the swamp and then go back into it, you have the awareness of what's outside. And if you have that awareness and you decide to stay in the swamp, there's also tremendous guilt and shame attached to that. So people want to avoid the guilt and shame. So it's like, let's just stay put where we are. So there's a lot of variables related to why we self-sabotage. And that's one of them. There's no turning back once you see the truth of yourself. It's like, you can't do, you know, 5 grams of mushrooms or a full hit of DMT or drink 2 cups of ayahuasca and be the same person after that. It's impossible. You know, you can't go beyond, you know, the egoic realm and really see what's behind the veil and come back and just keep doing the same things you've always done without a certain level of guilt and shame around that. You know, so once you get started, you know, on some level, there's no turning back without the emotional consequences. And, you know, you have to be ready for everything changing.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, dude, if you're thriving, stay there. But if you're not, like, why not, man? It's hard for sure, yes. But staying in your current position is harder. I guarantee it.
Mhm.
And I don't know, man, but
And start
what,
simple. Start simple. That's, we talked about a lot of really deep, complex stuff today because we're talking about the root causes of illness and disease from our perspective. Um, but the truth is, start simple. Start with the four doctors, six foundation principles, going for a walk every day, eating organic food and getting to bed on time and drinking just quality water. And, just start with that and see where it takes you. If you need support beyond that, someone like yourself, someone like myself, there's coaches and programs that can support you with that, but always just start with the low hanging fruit. I always tell people, like we said, simplicity before complexity.
yeah, and you brought up the COVID example many times, as
Uh,
magnifying the pathology that was already present in the culture. And I
yeah.
feel like that's one of the things, that's one of the issues is that this pathology, this swamp is like spreading like a cancer, like a virus, because they're trying to like basically like through all the legal processes and the new rules they try to implement, etc. They're trying to impose that pathological belief like on you, for example,
Mhm.
whether you don't want it either,
Yeah.
So it's like not only contained, but it's like spreading, and then they're trying to kind of get more people into the swamp. I don't
Yeah.
know. Like,
I mean, this is where all of my clients, people I work with, students, I always tell them to be as mindful with the information you consume as you are the food you consume. Because, just like there's junk food and empty calories and, food that causes a lot of inflammation in your body, there's information that is junk information, empty calories, and causes a lot of inflammation in your psyche and your ego. And, I think it's so essential that people have healthy boundaries with their devices, making sure that when you're consuming information, that you're consuming quality information. Like when you're consuming food, you're consuming quality food. You're consuming it in the right dosage, the right amount, the right quantity, just as much as the right quality. And just like you're consuming a variety of food to support a diverse microbiome and diverse nutrient profile, consuming a variety of information to have a diversity in your psyche and your thought patterning, it's really important that that be dialed in. I always, remember when Paul said, don't consume more information than you can put in formation,
mhm.
right? Which means don't consume more information than you can digest, metabolize, assimilate, and then eliminate the waste. If you can't go through that process with information, just like you do with food, you're going to have the exact problems in your psyche as you do in your gut, which might be constipation, poor digestion, bacterial overgrowth, parasites, so the information consumption in the minds and the food consumption in the body is a mirror. So we want to make sure that the quality, the quantity, and the diversity is dialed in.
Yeah. I just feel like I hate to be kind of the negative guy on the podcast here. I just feel if people continue to stay in that environment, it's going to be really tough to even do all those things consistently that you mentioned.
It's true. And another very simple low-hanging fruit tool is get outside, spend time in nature, ground yourself, just get your feet on the ground, go spend time in the woods, go for a hike, leave your phone, leave your watch, leave all of your devices, and just go be in nature. And when you're in nature, you're consuming tremendous amounts of information from the environment that is in harmony with your body, with your biology, and with your cells. So just like there's incoming information on our devices all day, there's incoming information from our environment. And that's really what viruses are. Viruses are envelopes of genetic information, from the environment. So it's important that we really ground ourselves outdoors. And I also think that's one of the reasons why there's a huge epidemic of obesity as well, is there's a subtle energetic phenomenon of people are so overstimulated by their devices that the weight on their body is a way they ground themselves. Right? If you think about, your body is like the earth element and your mind is the air element, all of the technological stimulation and devices, that's all the air elements. So when you have too much air, the iCloud, when you have too much air, you need more earth. So the weight of the body is the earth element that's pulling you back into yourself. This is why like a lot of psychics and intuitives are actually very overweight, is because the added weight really helps ground them. So I think that's the case with a lot of the technology as well, is people who are overweight are unconsciously trying to ground themselves.
Well, what's your take on the slow but obvious move towards becoming like cyber sapiens you're talking about in terms of information consumption? Actually, now I don't know if you've heard of it, but I think the company's called like Neuralink, or I'm sure there are many other companies. I don't really follow it in detail. They're planning on taking a small piece of chunk out of your skull and implanting like a chip that has like microfibers that go in your brain that help you consume information more efficiently and faster. So it's like it goes against exactly like now they're going like super fast and completely the wrong direction. I feel it's like people can't even handle the amount of information and stress and demand on them now, but like let's put this chip in so they could be like a little more productive. What could go wrong,
on that. I'll take a hard pass on that. Not something I'm interested in. I think, Rudolf Steiner said, 100 plus years ago, that man will continue to invent technologies outside of himself until he realizes that everything he's invented outside of himself is a technology that already exists within him. The question is, will we destroy ourselves before we realize that? Right? Rudolf Steiner, who was, a brilliant visionary and teacher, philosopher and mystic, said this, in the early 1900s. So, he predicted all of this. And I think everything he's saying is damn true. I mean, the virtual reality stuff, you see people wearing like those big like goggles and going in, like, you don't need that. All you need is, your mind, your third eye. And if you want some good plant medicine, that's all you need to open up a new reality. There's infinite dimensions that we can tap into, and, we don't need a device outside of us in order for us to escape into a new dimension of reality. We have those technologies within us. So, that's something that our culture also does, is we're always looking outside of ourselves for answers. We're always outsourcing rather than realizing that, all of these things already exist within us.
Yeah, I just find at the end of the day, it's like all these tools are, once again, just ways of ignoring having to look in the mirror and realize that, like, A, you're doing it to yourself. B, that means you could just stop doing it to yourself, whatever that could be, because that alone is it's tough when you get that kind of responsibility. You know what I mean? It's not easy. And I feel like also just a lot of people they don't want true freedom, because true freedom is actually tough and stressful. They want to be told like what to do in a way that makes them perceive that is what they wanted to do all along, just to ignore that personal responsibility. So I feel like that part's going to be tough to overcome. And there are parts of me that are like that too. I'm not putting myself above it. So
there's the child archetype who always wants to be told what to do. And this is why Osho said that, freedom is the most dangerous thing in the world. And the reason is, when you realize that you have true freedom, that you can choose anything. You can choose to be successful. You can choose to not be successful. You can choose to be married to this person. You can choose to leave this person. You have infinite choices. And most of us, and I've witnessed this in myself, most of us don't want the responsibility of making those choices. Most people want to be told what to do. I have beautiful teachers and mentors, and I have to be very careful of the child archetype inside of me that wants so-and-so coach or mentor to tell me what to do, what choice to make. And fortunately, I have coaches and mentors that are smart enough that don't tell me what to do, but they give me the tools to access that choice from my higher self. So that is a key element with the child archetype is a lot of times we want to outsource our power of choice, to some external authority figure. So there's another example of how the archetypal landscape is very helpful in understanding a lot of these patterns.
Do you feel like a person could ever, like, just to narrow the subject, I mean, this could happen in any field whatsoever, but just to narrow down the subject, do you feel like a person could ever get out of a childhood state if they continue to kind of like work at a corporate office? Because if you look at the environment there, I mean, look, basically your boss is substituted for your biological father, for example. So it's like, oh, I got to turn in my projects on time. So my boss, aka my daddy, kind of gives me my allowance, my check. Oh, I gotta, make sure to ask him, I gotta be good and make sure to ask him for time off so I can hang out with my friends on the weekend, aka I gotta ask my boss for vacation time, or I gotta compete with my siblings because of the pyramid structure of corporate work to impress my dad, my boss. Mm-hmm. So he kind of favors me for the promotion, you know what I mean? So it's like a permanent forever childhood state. Could a person like really escape that if they remain in that environment, or are they just going to be like a forever child?
Well, I don't think you necessarily, if you're in the corporate world working for somebody, I don't think that necessarily equates to you're always going to be a child. Sure, there's hierarchical kind of roles that are being played. So technically, sure, there is an authority figure and a kind of child's figure, if you want to call it that, but it's more an internal experience. I think one thing that we kind of can get trapped with is thinking that in order for me to change my life circumstances or my internal, landscape or experience, I have to change my external environment. So a lot of times we can get addicted, once again, to looking outside of us of, I need to change my job, I need to change this, I need to change that. Where if you change the place inside of you that you're engaging all of it from, then all of that stuff starts to change. So I do think that if someone enjoys the corporate world and is choosing to be in that job and they enjoy working for the person they're working for, and they understand that what comes along with that is, yeah, I have to ask for my time off. I have to, report to someone about, like, sure, there you might have that dynamic, but if you're relating to it and engaging all of that and being in relationship with all of that from a place of more empowerment, then I don't think you always have to change your external environment or all the details in your external life to heal that inside of you. So I think, once again, that could be going too far to the other extreme of looking outside of you in order for you to heal something internally, where you can heal that within yourself and not leave your job. But you have to be willing to understand that, look, there are certain aspects of my job that I have to ask permission for various things. And if I'm choosing to be in that job, that's different than the child who says, I have to be here. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the thing is, are you choosing to be in the corporate job, or do you feel like you have to be in the corporate world? Right? That's the difference between the adult and the child. It's not whether you're in the corporate world or not, it's whether you're choosing to be there or you think you have to be there.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like one thing to consider too that's important is especially like in and I feel what you said, there is validity there, but especially in like business, like motivational speaking circles, people are like, oh, you just got to change your mind and you can work 24 hours a day. You could only sleep like 30 minutes a day and everything's going to be okay. And I feel like one thing to consider is I look at it from how the central nervous system has evolved. And so it's like you got to look like, oh, pre-farming, pre-domestication of animals and crops, you had hunter-gatherers, how's their central nervous system functioning with their environment? Typically, it's kind of like if you look at it, it's evolved to deal with high peaks of stress as well, followed by valleys of literally nothing going on. So you hunt a mammoth, it's obviously stressful. And then for a few months, presuming it's wintertime and you're in Europe, for example, you're just hanging out, in the woods, drinking fresh spring water, hanging out with your tribe, definitely not working behind a computer like 10 hours a day, eating wild fish, wild crops, wild meat, et cetera, under the sun all day. With stuff of that sort. But today it's kind of like, what do you got? You getting up, you're probably not well rested. Okay, you have some coffee, spikes your cortisol, you get on the freeway, you're driving. Driving is actually very stressful on the central nervous system. A lot of people don't know that. It has to be like very amped up to stay in the lanes. You got this car over here, you got this car honking over here. You barely show up to work on time. You're working 8-10 hours under a lot of demand, a lot of micro stresses there due to social politics that are inevitable in any corporate environment. Definitely there has to be some sacrifice, I feel, in some core values if you're blending into like a big company versus just doing your thing. So there's that disconnect that's causing micro stresses in the central nervous system. People go out and eat fast food on the weekend because it's reinforced by that culture. Even if they eat there, like in places like Google, they're cooking a lot of those foods with like industrial seed oils, and most of it is just factory farmed raised or industrial agriculture, et cetera. They go home, get in traffic again, and stuff of that sort. I just feel like there's only so much mind shift changing you can do when your biology has evolved to function a certain way. It's ideal to get it to function that way. Yes, you could try to fit this circle into a square box. And if you really hit it hard enough, I'm sure it would fit, but it would be all deformed and messed up, you know what I mean, et cetera, which is an example of like a person having a successful 30-year career and they're a complete physical and psychological mess by the end of their career. 7-8 pharmaceutical drugs, just totally depressed, totally overweight. That's just an example of getting that circular round thing to fit into that square pug. So it's like, I feel the mind shift is important for sure, because wherever you go, there you are. So obviously, you can't keep taking your problems with you, but there's also inevitably a certain kind of biology that you have to follow, some hard set rules that are in your DNA that have to be followed. And that environment has to facilitate that. And if it doesn't, there's, once again, not much. I mean, you could do damage control by changing your mind shift, but I haven't seen it done successfully by almost anyone.
Yeah. And, what you talked about was a very stressful lifestyle, and it was also very sedentary, right? So you're going from sitting at home to sitting in your car to sitting at your office to sitting in your car to sitting back at home. So there's high levels of stress, but you're also not moving your body physically. So, I remember listening to an interview once about, the blue zones and longevity. And there was this guy, he was over 100 and he lived in one of these blue zones. And someone asked him, like, what's the difference between, our ancestors and modern day man? And he said, we used to have active bodies and still minds. And now we have busy minds and sedentary bodies. So there was kind of that flip-flop. And it just kind of came up in my mind when you were talking about that whole kind of like stressful lifestyle. It's like the mind is very busy, but the body's sedentary. Where ancestrally our bodies were moving, but our minds were calm. We weren't overstimulated. We weren't worrying about a million things. When we needed to work, we worked. When we were able to rest, we rested. And there was the simplicity. So I always remember kind of active body, calm mind versus sedentary body, busy mind. Very simple, but very wise.
Yeah. So I don't know if in between the lines, that means you agreed with what I said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. I was like, I got lost in a little bit of what you're
Absolutely.
saying there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just personally in 15 years haven't seen, especially I did corporate health lectures a long while back as well. And I just haven't seen, even when people try to be health conscious, yes, you could do some good damage control here and there. And if it's a very high priority and stuff and that, you could probably make it happen. But for most people, I just kind of see a lot of failures when they continue to stay in that environment, even if they have like silly corporate wellness programs, which I feel are way overpriced and focus a lot of times on the wrong issues. Because I feel if like a lot of corporate wellness professionals really cared about corporate workers, they would tell them to stop going back to their job for the most part. Once again, no absolutes, but for the most case. But hey, that's my take. What do I know? So do you have like any other topics you want to touch on, or I'm happy to try to keep up with anything you want to chat about.
Well, we dove into some really deep stuff today. And I feel very good about all the things we explored. And I hope your listeners really kind of take away some kind of key points, both on the simplicity side of dialing in the basics, and then on the complexity side of diving into some of the root causes, being, on the archetypal landscape. But, the greatest place anyone can start is, what we learned, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, which is figure out what your dream is, figure out where you're out of balance, assess where you're making optimal, suboptimal, or, apathetic choices, and then establish core values for your 4 doctors. I think, when I work with clients, that's always where I start. I always start with 1, what's your dream? 2, where are you out of balance? 3, let's assess your choices. And 4, what are your core values around the 4 doctors? And that usually goes 90 to 95% of the way. And then a lot of what we talked about today being the survival archetypes and some of the religious stuff and some of the, limiting belief systems and all of that in the psyche, like that's that 5% that's really important. But the first 95% you can dial in with those 4 very simple steps. So that's why, I love a lot of the HLC work that you and I did together, is we can really see that foundation. So, I would just really invite people to start there. And, my online program, Healing the Mind, A Journey to Wholeness, is a 21-day program that takes you through all of that and a lot more. And I always tell people, start with those basics, start with that foundation. And then if you need extra support, like one-on-one coaching, and you want to dive into some of this deeper material, someone like myself or yourself would be more than happy to do that. But I think there's so much low-hanging fruit for people to start with, and, I think that would be kind of my closing message, would be to really start there.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for being a guest, Greg. Probably have you on again in the near future sometime. You're always welcome back. And I will have all his contact information in the description. So if you guys want to make it easy, you just kind of click away there. And so yeah, thanks for jumping in. It's good to see you again. And thanks for everyone who joined into the podcast.
Thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you've ever had trouble losing weight, or you've lost weight, but still didn't have the ideal body or health you're aiming for, please feel free to reach out anytime and book an assessment. Eugene will work with you to cover your goals in detail, see what's holding you back, and go from there. In the meantime, feel free to check out the countless testimonials on Eugene's website in the link below. In the testimonial section, you'll notice everyone has various backgrounds, are of all different ages, and all have had different challenges in their life, but they all have one thing in common: they were all able to find their health and achieve their ideal body. You're also welcome to add yourself to the Facebook group in the link below. There you'll have access to the live videos that Eugene does weekly on Sundays, and other helpful content. Thank you again for tuning in.